Night at Winterfell was not black but a shade of gray that lived between embers and snow. It seeped under doors and lay like a hush across the yard, muffling the clang of the forge to a dull heartbeat, the kennels to a soft rasp of sleeping hounds. In the broken tower, where smells of hot oil and boiled linen hung over a boy's still form, Jon Snow sat with Ghost at his feet and let the grayness take the edges off his thoughts until they were only the shape of Bran's fingers beneath his palm. "You're warm," Jon murmured, more to convince himself than to tell Bran anything. The hand in his didn't tighten, didn't twitch. "You're still here." A log collapsed in the hearth with a pop and a shower of sparks. Maester Luwin had left an hour past to sleep in snatches. Robb had gone to see to the men, and Lady Catelyn, not mother in Jon's head, not once, was a carved thing beside the bed, her eyes the same color as the ice on the Weirwood's pond. She had been like that since the fall, as if the grief had burned and collapsed and cooled at last into iron. When Jon spoke, she didn't answer. She hardly moved at all unless the maester asked her to. Ghost lifted his head to peer at Bran and then at the door. He was all pale shadows until the fire caught in his eyes. "You smell something?" Jon asked him under his breath. He never stopped being startled that the direwolf would answer him with a look as if he understood every word. Ghost's ears tipped forward and then stilled. No intruder this night, then. Only the same four walls. Only the weight of what Jon hadn't been able to do. He squeezed Bran's fingers a little and released them. "I'll sit until dawn," he added to both of them, though the dawns hadn't done much for weeks. He stood because sitting had sunk into his bones like a second sleep. The flagstones were cold through his boots. He crossed to the window where a draft fingered the rushes below and opened the shutter just enough to let breath-white air move across his face. Winterfell breathed back at him. The alehouse rattle, the soft fidget of horses, the distant mutter of the gatehouse. The high wooden walkway that enclosed the godswood was a darker line beyond, and behind it, the ancient bulk of the weirwood rose as a thought in the brain rises even when you try not to think it. Jon swallowed and shut the shutter again. When he turned, Bran's eyes were open. Jon had dreamed of it often enough that for a heartbeat it was the dream again. The old wishful one where Bran would blink at him and say he'd only pretended to be asleep because it was a game. But the eyes that looked at him were not a boy's eyes. They were wide but deep, glass-bright in the firelight, and they found Jon without wandering, as if they had followed a long road to this room and knew exactly where they had meant to end. "Bran?" Jon said, an oath and a plea. The carved shape in the chair changed. Lady Catelyn's head came up. Her hands flattened on the coverlet. Bran's lips parted. The sound that came out was a whisper born on the tiniest shift of breath. Jon bent until his ear was close enough to catch it. "Bird," Bran said. The word was a thread drawn from a well. "Mockingbird." Jon had to swallow twice before what would obey him. What bird? But Bran's gaze had gone past him, beyond the bed's footboard, through the tower and its old stone, to fix somewhere Jon's own eyes could not go. "Leaves," Bran went on, hoarse as if he'd run to make the word. "Red. Faces." His lashes fluttered once. "Milk," he whispered. "Sweet. Tears." Lady Catelyn's hand grabbed Jon's sleeve with sudden life. "Maester!" she cried, and her voice was so strong it hurt to hear it. "Maester Luwin." Jon could not look away from Bran long enough to run. He stood useless as the door was pulled open and feet hammered the stair and Luwin was there, chain clinking, hands steady in a way that steadied them all. By the time dawn had pressed up against the narrow panes, Bran was sleeping again, breath even, lashes still. Luwin had bled him and examined him and made the soft, contented noises that maesters make around a body that has not, as it were, decided to die. "He spoke," Lady Catelyn had said, and Luwin had nodded as if this were a thing that might now happen of mornings. Boys injured, the world turning, words appearing. Jon let the tide of the room pull around him while his own thoughts snagged on the words and would not let go. A bird. A mockingbird. Red leaves and faces. Milk. Tears. He was still thinking them when he found himself in the yard with a cup he couldn't remember fetching and Ghost at his heel. The yard had gone from gray to something that held the idea of color. Servants moved brisker. Smoke from the kitchens carried meat. The sun, if it existed today, had not yet convinced the clouds. Robb had plans in hand. Jon heard him giving them to Ser Roderick. Who would be where, which men at the gate, what would be done if the Southrons who had come with the king decided to make trouble. Jon drank, found the cup held only air, and went toward the one place in Winterfell the words Bran had spoken might mean. Because red leaves and faces meant godswood, and that meant the heart tree, and Jon could not put that off. The godswood took sound and changed it. The walkway's planks made a different creak here. Crows said different things. The soil smelled black and alive even in this early winter. The heart tree's trunk was pale enough to seem lit from within. It was an old face, older than names, and its tears were the red sap that crusted in the grooves like the remnants of some surgery. Jon knelt before it because he needed the earth to hold him while he set his mind down in front of the same. Ghost padded to the water's edge and drank once, twice, watching him. Mockingbird, Jon said aloud. Milk, tears. It might have been stupid to say them to old wood and older stone. But Winterfell had the habit of keeping your stupidities for you, and in this little stand of trees there had never been shame. Jon shut his eyes and let the gods would carry him, if it meant to. For a while he heard only the present. The slow rise and fall of his own breath, water lapping, wind like a mother's hand. Then something that was not sound slid across his mind. His palm had been warm around Bran's fingers. That warmth persisted now where he pressed both hands into the cold earth. In the dark behind his lids there was a sense of heights and of looking down. Not sight, not entirely. Winterfell as a shape, and beyond it a rush of green that was not this godswood but others. A road. 1,000 roads. A city of pale stone where a river forked and split around hills. A keep with a broken tower, no, not broken, no, higher. A hall where the air was dry and the voices oiled. A laugh that had too many edges. A pin in the shape of a songbird, and the idea of a name, Peter. The sensation left him with a shiver. Ghost was watching when he opened his eyes. The direwolf's head tilted, and Jon did not bother to argue with the thought that Ghost understood. It's something, he told him. To the heart tree he said, softer. It's someone. On his way back through the yard, the day had thickened into its proper shape. Robb saw him and started toward him, worry and impatience both under his skin. Bran spoke, Jon said before Robb could ask. Robb's face broke like ice under a boot. Spoke? What? He woke. He looked at me. Jon couldn't stop himself from smiling with it even while it hurt him. At us. He said some words. Gods. Robb put a hand on Jon's shoulder, squeezed hard enough to be felt through wool and leather. Mother, she heard. Luwin's with him and says he should sleep. Jon glanced past Robb's shoulder without thinking and saw the Queen's men walking in pairs in their bright southern leather. Between them the dwarf waddled, small but moving with a quickness that read as something other than haste. Tyrion Lannister saw Jon at almost the same moment. Surprise, boredom, mischief, and a thinking man's carefulness flitted across his face as if they had the right of way there. Brother, Robb said, half a warning. I'll speak to him, Jon said. Take Theon, Robb told him in his lord's voice. Jon didn't. Theon would turn anything into a jest, and Greyjoy jests went sour. He went alone, and Ghost came without argument. The dwarf watched Ghost as Jon approached. You northerners breed wolves instead of lapdogs, he observed, and when Jon didn't answer, added, I mean that as a compliment. The lapdogs hereabouts are tedious. Ser, Jon said. Oh, not that, the imp sighed. Ser is for men with spurs. You may call me Tyrion. You are the bastard, are you not? Jon Snow. He said it flat. He'd learned already that the people who wanted to hang the word bastard around his neck were disappointed if they couldn't see it choke him. Bran is my brother. So I have heard. Tyrion's mouth did a small thing that could have been sorrow if one wanted to be charitable. I was sorry for the fall. Children ought to be allowed to keep their legs. Jon looked down at the dwarf's small twisted ones and then back up at the clean, clever lines of his face, and decided he would be charitable. "He spoke this morning," he said, and there, he realized, was a tightness behind the words he hadn't known was there. He wanted that to matter in the world the way it mattered in his chest. "Did he?" Tyrion murmured. "Words have a way of walking on their own. A good sign." He said some things. Birds. Red leaves. Mockingbird. Jon watched the Lannisters' eyes carefully because he had learned to watch eyes. He saw them sharpen, almost invisibly. "You're from the south," he added. "Do men there wear mockingbirds on their cloaks?" "They wear all manner of nonsense," Tyrion said dryly. "Mockingbird, well, there is a man in King's Landing who carries one. Or so I hear." His smile edged. "Peter Baelish, called Littlefinger, master of coin. He grew up in Riverrun and loved your Lady Catelyn when loving her was an adolescent occupation of the countryside at large. He was small then. He is my size still, but less honest about it." Jon filed it inside. "You know him?" "I know of most men who count," Tyrion said, and did not brag because it wasn't a brag so much as a fact about how he stayed alive in a place hungry for meat. "Littlefinger counts. Not in the way he claims, but in the way snakes count in tall grass." A ripple went through the yard. Men in the king's colors were stopping to pester Robb's guards. Lady Catelyn was crossing from the tower with her face set hard as a wall. Jon's hand closed on something he had not realized he'd taken from the bedside table. A single stiff hair, pale as milk and finer than silk, caught in the hinge of the carved headboard. He didn't know why his fingers had taken it, only that his mind had said hold and he had obeyed. "Do you have a knife of Valyrian steel?" he asked Tyrion abruptly. Tyrion's laugh was real. "If I did, Jon Snow, I'd show it to you twice a day and stroke it at supper." "No. Why?" "There's a dagger," Jon said. He kept his voice too level and heard that. "Curved. Hilt of dragon bone. It cut my lady when a man tried to." He didn't find a word for it that would not be wrong. "It was left in Winterfell." "Ah," Tyrion said. There was no surprise now, only attention. "And someone will say it was mine. Was it?" Jon asked, "Because you don't learn anything by saying what you want men to say." No, Tyrion's answer did not wobble. "And if a man in King's Landing tells your lady it was, he will be lying. Peter lies very well in particular. He finds the particular like a key." Jon let breath out through his teeth. The cold kissed him clean where it passed his lips. "Mockingbird," he said again, and now the word belonged to a face and a place and a lie. There was not much time before the king grew tired of the cold and the north and the hunting and dragged his new men south like a net. Jon took what there was and made it do. He went to Maester Luwin and asked about poisons, and the Maester asked him why, and Jon said quietly, "Bran said milk and tears." And the way Luwin's head jerked at that made Jon wish he'd pretended he'd dreamed it himself so as not to put that strangeness on Bran again. "The tears of Lys," Luwin said, chain whispering as if it were a living thing. "A rare poison. Tasteless if mixed in wine. It is not an herb a maester keeps. Not one a wise man mentions to lords at supper. Where would he have The gods have their own dictionaries. Could a woman get it?" Jon asked. Or He didn't know what to call a man who smiled at kings and counted coin and had grown up a boy in a river keep. The master of coin? Luwin looked at him for a long breath in which the long day did not move. "Anyone with gold and fewer scruples than God," he said at last, and that was an odd thing for a maester to say, which meant it was true. "It is not something men seek if they mean to sleep well. Do you think?" "I think Bran's words are not useless," Jon said. He had learned to speak to Luwin without the flinch that Lady Catelyn's eyes put into him. "And I think if my father goes south, he should know not to take a mockingbird's word to heart." Luwin sat down and pinched the bridge of his nose as if to contain the number of things he meant to say and to keep only the most necessary. "Lady Catelyn is leaving today," he said, "to warn your lord father of what befalls. She will take the knife. She asked that I make a copy of the letter she received from Lady Lisa. I have done so. Would you tell her this, Jon? Or do you mean that I should?" Jon thought of Lady Catelyn's hand on his sleeve, her voice calling for the maester, the way her mouth had not shaped his name in a decade. "I'll tell her," Jon said. "Could have gone poorly." The corridor to the covered bridge might as well have been the length of a southern road. Jon walked it as a man carrying a thing you couldn't see. He found her in the solar with the windows thrown wide because she had decided air was better than heat. Her cheeks were chapped and bright. The dagger lay on the table, black as if it had swallowed light whole. She glanced once at Jon and then changed the way she stood so that he could see her hands and knew she would not strike him for being a reminder of something she didn't want to remember. "You were with him," she said, and for a breath there was apology in her. "Thank you." "Lady," Jon said. Ghost lay down behind him with his head on his paws and the quiet that comes from wolves. She followed his eyes to the dagger. "It is a hateful thing. Yet tools aren't hateful, are they? Only the hands that use them are. He meant to cut my son's throat with that." Jon reached, touched the blade's spine. It was lighter than it should have been. "Maester Luwin says there is a poison called the Tears of Lys," he said. "Bran said milk and tears. He also said mockingbird. The imp, Tyrion, said that in King's Landing there's a man who wears one. Peter Baelish." Lady Catelyn's face made a shape he had never seen on it. Memory and something like dread, both old. "Peter," she said softly. "He lived at Riverrun. She shut her mouth and then she opened it again. "He was a boy and ran about after me the way boys of a certain age run after a woman who will never be theirs. He fought Brandon for me once with knives. He was cut and would have died if the river had been a little higher. He wears a mockingbird because his house sigil is a tiny thing on a bare island." She looked at Jon not like a bastard but like a messenger for the first time in his life. "Why do you tell me this, Jon Snow?" "Because he lies," Jon said. "Because if you show him that dagger he will tell you it belonged to someone you can reach and then men will do things they cannot take back. Tyrion says it isn't his dagger. He said Littlefinger will say it is. He was very sure." "And why would the dwarf know that?" she asked, but not as if she didn't believe that he might. "Because in a pit full of snakes one snake knows the other," Jon said, surprising himself with the sharpness of it. He softened. "Please don't trust that man. Do not tell him more than you must. Give Father our maester's thought about the Tears of Lys. He should speak to a man who knows poisons truly. He should not trust that." He could not find a polite word for the shape he meant. "He should not trust a man who smiles with every part of his face but his eyes." Lady Catelyn's hands had curled into her skirts in a way that told Jon as clearly as speech that she had been holding at arm's length the notion that the enemy did not wear a lion on his cloak. "Your father and Peter were friendly," she said, tasting the old word like something gone sour. "Ned is an honest man. He meets the world the way honest men do. It does not meet him back that way." Her gaze dropped to the dagger. "Yes, I will tell him, and I will watch Lord Baelish's mouth. Mockingbird, tears, gods help us." "Thank you, my lady," Jon said, and meant it, and that startled both of them. When she had gone and the yard had filled with the bustle of departure, horses stamping, a wagon creaking under the weight of a trunk, hoof clatter on stone that moved underfoot like a deep drum, Jon went back to the broken tower one last time. Maester Luwin had bundled Bran in blankets and sent the women away to stretch their legs. Alone, Bran looked as small as he had before he had ever climbed. Jon stood the way he had stood as a boy while Robb showed him how his shoulders would be a man's one day, trying to feel large enough to fill the air. He took Bran's hand and leaned close. "We'll find him," he said. "The bird with too many songs. You showed me where to look. I won't let them use this to hurt each other." He didn't know how he would not let them. He only knew he had said it, which felt like building a plank across a chasm and then stepping out to test it. Bran's lids flickered and didn't open. His lips made the tiniest shape. Jon bent, caught it. "Lisa," Bran breathed. "Lisa." Jon mouthed it and carried it to Maester Luwin and watched the Maester's face go stranger still. "Lady Lisa wrote the letter," Luwin said. "She loved her husband, Jon Arryn. So she says." "So she says," Jon echoed. "The king left Winterfell as kings leave anything. as if the place were satisfied to give him back. Glory and laughter and the smell of horse went south on the King's Road. Lord Eddard went with him. Lady Catelyn went by other ways. Robb took his father's place like a cloak he had not grown into. Jon said his farewells to the daughters in a corner of the yard, Arya wild-eyed with rage at having to go, Sansa poised with a new carefulness in her, the way a girl holds herself when she realizes men have started counting her, and endured the shape of Lady Catelyn's eyes not touching him. He hugged Robb hard enough to bruise. He tried to say the right words to Bran and said the wrong ones, and then said nothing because there was nothing that could be right. Before he rode, he found the dwarf again because some things one does because they become a line in you and you must follow it to see what it touches. "You're going north to piss off the edge of the world," Jon said. Tyrion brightened. "I am. It's always better to aim for the dramatic if you can manage it. And you go to the wall to be a brother. So they say." Jon stroked Ghost's head once, watched that the men around them stayed clear of the wolf's red eyes, and decided he could speak the thing he hadn't said to anyone else because if a man had ever inherited the Habby. Tea of truth as a test Tyrion Lannister had. Bran said Lisa, and Luwin says the tears of Lys. Your father's city is full of men who would kill for a cup of wine. But this feels. He could not find a word for the kind of shape he meant. If you're right about the knife, if you are Tyrion, don't let a man named Littlefinger make my lady arrest you for a thing you did not do. Tyrion studied him with that heavy-lidded attention that made him look like something that lived in a library. I generally avoid arrests, he said, but accepted. If a little man in King's Landing suggests that his knife was mine, I will be sure to ask him in front of witnesses how he came by that knowledge. We will see what becomes of his tongue when he can't be the only person in the room. Don't be alone with him, Jon said. My dear bastard. I try never to be alone with anyone in that city. Tyrion flicked a crumb from his glove. For what it's worth, I'm sorry about your brother, and I'm sorrier you're leaving him. It's a hard thing to put your love on a shelf and say you'll come back to it later. Jon surprised himself by saying, thank you, and meaning it very much. He rode with Benjen Stark under a sky the color of old iron and felt the world thin as they went north. Winterfell fell behind the way home falls behind you when you are young, greatly and at once. On the road, words had to be chosen for weather and for thieves and for how you shape the days. He found his mind returning to red leaves, to mockingbirds, to milk and tears, as hooves 8 miles and the wind ate his face. When the wall rose like a white impossibility, the thoughts did not stop, but they took on the shape of a promise he carried inside him rather than a weight. He told himself there were ravens and roads. He told himself that letters moved faster than swords sometimes. They did that time. Lady Catelyn came to King's Landing as a ghost in a hood and was met not by the hand she expected, soft and smiling, but by a man's voice behind a screen that said, "My lord is here," in tones that assured her of nothing. When Peter Baelish materialized out of that shadow, he wore a mockingbird on his throat and grief in the careful corners of his eyes. He took her hands like a man drowning takes rope, and he said, "Cat," in a boy's voice, and he lied. He lied about the dagger and said it was Tyrion's, and he lied about what a good idea it was for her to seize a lion on the road, and he lied about the letters he had received. He had a gift for lying that had rarely failed him. One letter he had not gamed for was a scrap on which Maester Luwin had written with clean, square hand the words Jon Snow brought from the snow. Mockingbird. Tears of Lys. Do not trust Lord Baelish's word. Ask Varys. Ask about poison. When she had let Peter's hands go, she sent for Varys. You did not send for Varys, not truly. He came where he meant. He came that day because he smelled a stir in the nest that meant something different from every other stir. Tears, Lady Catelyn said when he had finished admiring the Queen's tapestries. The tears of Lys. The eunuch's lids lowered in what might have been sorrow or delight. A rare name to come out of a northern lady's purse. His eyes lifted to Catelyn Tully's face. A word a woman hears but seldom says. And yet, if she says it, Lady Catelyn answered, men start looking nervous. They do. He folded his hands over his belly. His voice went almost gentle. Your husband's predecessor, Jon Arryn, had a sickness that did not look like a sickness. Some called it a chill. Some called it his age. Some called it the will of the gods. I have only ever called it murder, my lady. But naming a thing does not make it easier to move. Move it, Catelyn said very quietly. On whose authority? Varys asked, all softness. Yours? Your lord husband's? The king's? His eyes sharpened kindly. There is a man whose tongue is the most dangerous thing about him. He wears a certain bird as a joke. He brings knives to boys' games. He whispers directions into the hearts of frightened ladies. He paused. If you would move him, you must do it in daylight with enough men in the room to make him stop smiling. You'll help us, Catelyn said. I am a small man with no gifts that make a loud noise, Varys replied. But I can put the right people into the right rooms at the right hour. I can wake the right fears at court. I can ask the wrong question of the right Grand Maester and watch him sweat. He smiled as if at a child. You will want your husband for this, my lady. He is astonishingly honest. It terrifies men like the one you mean. When Lord Eddard came, he came with the smell of horses and road and disappointment with the city already written around his mouth. It did not take long for the small council to try to drown him in the kinds of words that men make when they do not want to say the thing that matters. Varys hummed and Peter made jokes and Renley smoothed everything. Pycelle coughed. Ned Stark listened to them the way a man listens to rain against a window he intends to go through anyway. He felt the place closing like a trap and knew that he would walk into it if he let tiredness count as prudence. That night his wife ghosted into his chamber, and after the initial anger and fear, after the pressed hands and the urgent words in a rush, she set Luwin's square hand in his palm with one finger and said, "Read." He read. When he lifted his eyes, the rooms of his life had altered. "I know this man," he said to Catelyn. "Baelish. I knew him when he was a boy. He is changed and not changed. He was always one to make games out of love." "He will try to make a game of this," she said. "Speak to the eunuch. He will not tell you truth for free, but he will show you where the door is. Then speak in a room where the king can hear. Do not speak to Peter when he can place you among his friends." Ned, who had never thought of himself as a man for intrigue, found himself walking through the corridors of the Red Keep with his senses stretched tight like bowstrings. He spoke to Varys and asked him directly about the tears of Lys and watched kindness blur into fear and settle into respect. He took his own men and went into Pycelle's chambers without the courtesy of knocking and asked which poison bottles the Grand Maester had in his possession with the tone of a lord who intends to empty them if he does not like the answers. He had Pycelle show him his ledgers and his purchases and his chains and the staff of his apothecary. He wrote with his own hand to Ser Hugh of the Vale and had him sent for and found that the boy had acquired a new taste for shining, expensive things after the hand had died. It was not proof. It was wind in the room, but the wind smelled of Lys. He let Peter be helpful. That was the trap's design. Peter offered him a brothel to stand in while he asked about a child the king had sired. Peter offered him charming shrugs. Peter wore a mockingbird that watched the room with bright amusement. Ned satisfied himself that he could not afford to throw a man from a window without evidence that even a drunk king could not ignore. Evidence came because Catelyn Stark, who had never liked the taste of secrets, put one into Lord Renly's ear instead of into the Queen's. Evidence came because Varys, in the manner of men who seem to know where all the strings lead, found a woman in a kitchen who had carried a cup on a certain series of mornings and had been paid on a certain day with a very particular coin that did not come out of a kitchen. Evidence came because Peter Baelish's little letters were a web, and webs shine when the light hits them the right way. Tyrion Lannister, when called to a morning meeting by a boy with eyes and no voice, arrived as a man arrives at entertainment. He found, to his interest, that it was entertainment. The king had been fetched from the yard where he was fighting the weight he had put on with a spear in his hand against a straw man. He was sweaty and alive and in no mood to read anything. Cersei came because she had not been asked, and she would be damned if she would let a room full of men make a shape without her. The counselors arranged themselves in their old patterns and waited for Ned to step wrong. Ned brought Lady Catelyn in like a blade he had decided to wear openly, and he brought the only other thing that could change the balance of a room as much as a sword, witnesses who had nothing to gain by lying for him. Varys stood with his hands folded as if he were a kindly ant. A kitchen woman with raw hands and good eyes held a cloth and twisted it, staring at the king as if Robert were a god she had not expected to see in person. A narrow-shouldered clerk from the mint had ink on 2 fingers and a look of terror on his face that wasn't about guilt. Grand Maester Pycelle looked old and sorrowful, which made men forgive him near anything. Tyrion watched the cast assemble and knew at once which one he did not like. The small, neat man with the bird on his throat who looked for all the world as if someone had given him a harp to play, and he would. "Lord Baelish," Eddard Stark said. He did not say Peter. "This dagger." He set it on the table without flourish, black edge shining like a laugh from a dark room. "You told my lady that it belonged to Lord Tyrion, that it was lost to him on a wager. On Prince Joffrey's name day," Peter said lightly. "Yes." "A convenient story," Tyrion said before the room had decided it would be more polite to let silence consider what mood it preferred. "It has the advantage of being the story you wanted to tell, Lord Baelish. The disadvantage is that it bears no resemblance to how I spend my money." Peter's smile did not move far, but the air around it did. "And yet you—" "I do not wager," Tyrion said. "And when I buy weapons I buy them for men whose arms will not drop them in a corridor of my father's house. I have not bought nor lost nor seen that dagger, though I could admire it. May I?" Without waiting, he picked it up and weighed it in those clever small hands. "Very pretty. Might I ask your grace," he added conversationally to Robert, "why this charming piece of bauble-making is the most important thing in the city this morning?" "Because a man with it tried to cut Eddard's boy's throat," Robert said, and the sudden cold of his voice silenced the next shrug that Peter might have made. "And because my friend thinks that dagger has lips somewhere." Catelyn stepped forward then, and men watched her because she was the kind of beautiful that comes from having been loved and wearied and made clear. "My son Bran spoke words after weeks of silence," she said. "He said red leaves and faces. He said milk and tears. Our maester believed he meant the tears of Lys. You may find it in the books of poison you do not keep in the kitchens." Pycelle coughed. "It would be an alarming thing for a woman to know." "Is this a trial?" Cersei asked icily. "Shall we find a dock for this kitchen girl and dunk her if she lies?" "My husband." "Honest men do not bring kitchen trash into the council chamber. Honest men bring the first person who brought a cup to a dead man's lips," Ned said. "You knew Jon Arryn." "I knew him. He did not die from a chill. He died from poison. If your Grand Maester finds that sentence rough on his ears, he should tell us what he smelled when the hand died." "Pycelle," Robert said. "His lordship was old," Pycelle said, and coughed again to buy breath. "He had been weakened. If there was poison," he floundered. "I cannot, And yet," Varys murmured, and his voice was a cloud that changed the room. "The tears of Lys have been purchased twice from a certain discreet shop near the fish market in the last half-year. The coin was new from the mint, paid by a man who does not handle his own money." "I sign receipts all day," Peter said, still smiling, though it cost him now. "You cannot think." "I can think you told Lady Catelyn a thing that would start a fight between wolves and lions," Ned said, and did not raise his voice. "I can think you chose to say that the dwarf owned the knife rather than that it belonged to a faceless man, because an accusation is a more useful thing than a question. I can think that you wrote to a woman at the Eyrie and asked for certain comforts to be sent to certain sickbeds because you know how frightened women will move. I can think that you tell truth precisely as far as it lets you pull a string." He looked at Robert, and the king was not asleep now. "You asked for honesty, Robert." "I asked for wine," Robert muttered, but his eyes were bright and his jaw had set. Catelyn unrolled a scrap of parchment and put it on the table. It was a poor thing to look at. The ink had blotted where the hand that wrote it had trembled. The words were a lover's words, and the room, male and armored and polished and stinkingly proud, made a sound as it understood that there was such a thing as a private letter and that it was now hanging naked in the air. Peter's face did not change, but the skin at the corners of his eyes tightened as if it wanted to. "My sweet Peter," it said, and went on to speak of how she had done what he'd told her, the way he'd said, and how frightened she had been about the milk, and how he had soothed her, and how her husband had coughed and then been quiet, and how the queen would be blamed, and how he would love her forever in a house by the sea. It was not proof written in plain letters that a court would swallow without chewing, but it was meat. "Where did you get that?" Peter asked softly, as if this were intimate between them. "In your rooms," Jory Castle said cheerfully. He had blood on his knuckles and a grin that explained it. "Your man tried to eat it first. Very loyal." "You broke into a counselor's rooms," Renley said, mostly to hear himself say something. "I went into the rooms of a man who told my wife that a prince's dagger belonged to the wrong man," Ned said. "If the king chooses to see me whipped for it after, I will take the lash. But first, I will give him the name of the dead man's poison." "Peter," Robert said almost on a laugh, "did you set the veil to kill my old friend?" Peter Baelish drew in a breath and let it out slowly. He had won for years because men had wanted to be amused. He had learned that if you smiled long enough, most rooms would smile back. He smiled now because he did not know how to stop doing it. "I would never harm Lord Arryn," he said, and his voice was the kind princes liked. "He was as a father to me." Catelyn Tully of Riverrun took one step toward him as if the step had been saved for years. "You fought Brandon Stark for me," she said, and her voice had no tremor. "You drew knives when your words were too small. Go on, Peter. Draw again. There are moments when the rooms of the Red Keep become other places. Battlefields, kitchens, theaters. The small council chamber became a yard that day. Peter's hand had in it a little knife he had not been holding a heartbeat ago. Jory's fist moved, but the wolf was closer. The king had put on no armor for a fight, and yet his presence was iron. Tyrion tipped his head, mildly impressed that the North had learned so quickly not to leave Peter where his tongue could make a door. "Put him in a cell," Robert said, not loud. "You cannot," Cersei began. "I can," Robert told her, and the look he gave her warned her that if she wanted to win again at this court, she needed a different day for it. "This is my city. That was my hand. I will not have men pissing in my wine." Peter Baelish laughed then, because laughter was a rope he pulled when he shoved a chest and found it would not move. "And what will you charge me with?" he asked sweetly. "Loving a lady as men love in songs? Writing letters that never were? Buying kitchen herbs? With lying to my face," the king said, "and to the face of the Lady of Winterfell. With plotting in my city. With—" He waved a hand, angry and magnificent. "I don't need words. I need to see you not smirking in every room I'm in. Down you go." Jory's hand was on Peter's arm. Peter went like a man who had forgotten the shape of fighting. His eyes at last showed something true. It was not fear precisely. It was calculation left without numbers to count. For a heartbeat they went from Catelyn to Ned to Varys to the Queen, adding nothing. Then he was gone in a rustle of men, and the mockingbird on his throat flashed and vanished like a bad story when the fire takes it. When the door shut, the room made a sound like breath. "This does not touch us," Cersei said at once, fierce and unafraid. "If he killed Jon Arryn, he did it to his own ends. His choosing, not ours." "Not yet," Ned said, too tired suddenly to fight the right fights with courtesy. "But I will speak to you after, my lady. About your brother and your children." The words came out before he told them to, as if his hand had drawn a sword that his mind had only meant to clean. Cersei's gaze stabbed him with 1,000 possible futures. Robert winced like a man who had trod on a nail and knew he'd have to keep walking. Renley looked at the tapestry of Aegon's conquest very hard, as if dragons could teach a man how not to be in the room he was in. Outside, in the kitchens where the heat rolled like a beast, the woman with the raw hands sat on a bench, and her fingers would not stop shaking. Varys stood in the shadow of an arch and watched her and smiled a little. He did not like to see the small be ground into paste. He adjusted the places where words would move next and went away to put a whisper into Ser Barristan's ear, because it was a good day for whispering and a better day for remembering that honor could be frightened into haste. In the Tower of the Hand, Ned sat and wrote to Winterfell and told them simply, We have placed Lord Baelish under guard on suspicion of the murder of Lord Arryn and for lying to your lady about the weapon used in the attack on Bran. Keep safe. Tell Bran that his words found me." That letter flew north on black wings and reached the rookery at Winterfell on a day that had decided to be clean and bright as if the sky had been scraped. Maester Luwin took it and read it and went at once to the broken tower. He read the line to Bran, who lay in his bed with his eyes open and a look that said he might be anywhere. When Luwin said, "Tell Bran that his words found me," a small smile touched the boy's mouth as if a feather had tickled it. "Words walk," Bran whispered. "Sometimes they run," Luwin replied, and blinked to find his eyes damp. Once in a story that would have been an end. There would have been a lesson. But life in the Seven Kingdoms did not grind down to morals so readily. The queen still had the shape of her secret to protect. The king still liked his whiskey better than his wife. The hand still had to walk into a graveyard of truth and choose which bones to carry out. Peter Baelish sat in a cell and made a list of every man who had put him there and what each one loved more than himself. His mind was as busy as a burrow after rain. In the north, the heart tree gave back stillness when men went to ask it for noise. Robb Stark learned what it was to be obeyed and hated it and loved it both. Lady Catelyn prayed as a Tully prays, with her mind and her hands. Theon Greyjoy laughed too loud and tightened his jaw after, alone, until the laughter cracked. Arya practiced with her stick in corridors and imagined that every man with a sneer could be taught to say sorry with bruises. Sansa tried to imagine that secrets could make a world more interesting and not make it smaller. Ghost slept at the foot of Bran's bed and woke twice in the same hour and did not know why. On the wall, Jon Snow learned the names of the men he would call brother and found that some of them had names like stones and some like wind. At night, he lay awake and listened to the great white world breathing with a sound you did not hear anywhere else. If he shut his eyes, he saw 1,000 roads from a height. He saw red leaves and a face that had not been carved but had grown. And he thought of a man trapped under the Red Keep and another who had put himself in the trap without knowing this was the wrong floor for ladders. He dreamed once, and woke with Ghost's fur under his hand and his breath a banner in the cold, that a room somewhere far south had opened and a woman with hair like a river had looked out of it and seen across an ocean the shape of a beast with wings and had decided to start counting how many ships it would take to cross. He did not know why that put a stone in his chest. He only knew it did. In King's Landing, Ned Stark took a turn no man had planned for him. With Peter Baelish out of the corridors, the currents were different. Men who had leaned on a post that had looked like the rest discovered it was gone. Varys drew closer to Ned and told him truths in the manner of men feeding a dog one finger at a time to keep it from biting the hand. Pycelle learned to cough more convincingly. Renley sharpened his charm. Cersei measured. One evening Ned stood at a window and looked at the city until it stopped being a city and started being a problem he could solve by making a list. He had learned to do that when the dead had names and the living had knives. He listed, Jon Arryn dead of poison. The tears of Lys in a city that pretended it did not know their name. The king's bastards developing in corners like weeds in good dirt. The book of lineages on his table that said with a scholar's patience the thing that his oath and his friendship would have to find a way to say to a man who would not want to hear it. Peter's letters seized. Peter's smile removed. He did not list his heart. Out the window the city smelled of hot stone and spilt wine and something sour that could have been old fish or old blood. He remembered, with a clarity like pain, the feel of snow in his beard and the thickness of Bran's fingers in his palm. He turned at last because the door had opened. Varys flowed in. "My lord," the eunuch murmured. "May I?" "You are here," Ned said. "Tell me why." "A certain bird sings even in a cage," Varys said. "It sings of a woman in the Eyrie with a conscience and of a letter that the king is not meant to see." His eyes lifted and met Ned's and, for once, there was no theater in them. "And it sings of another bird with a harder beak. The queen, who means to fly before you can clip her wings. Men who mean to kill take care. I do not enjoy death, my lord. It lingers. It never leaves a room." Ned looked past him at the city and the sea and the dark. "Do you think exposing him, Baelish, will change the wind?" "I think it has already," Varys said softly. The king listened this morning. The queen did not like it. She spent the afternoon making a set of plans she had not meant to make for another month. She will move faster now. Perhaps that is better. Perhaps you will not be betrayed at your own table by a man who thinks it amusing to throw knives without getting blood on his hands. Perhaps you will be betrayed by someone who likes their hands clean in other ways. Comforting, Ned said, with a grimness that was almost a joke. Nothing comforting ever lasts, Varys said, and inclined his head. Be where you can be seen. Walk with the king. Sharpen your truths. He smiled a little. And when you speak them early. The later the hour, the sharper the knives. That night, under the earth of Winterfell, Bran Stark dreamed again. He did not fall as he once had, he flew. He passed over a city where a mockingbird had once sat on a rooftop and no longer did. He looked down into a room where a queen stood alone and touched her throat as if it ached. He went further and saw a narrow sea throwing up light at dawn, and a girl on a bare hill who felt danger as a taste in her mouth and asked if she had ever had a brother who was not a cruel man. He returned through a roof of leaves to a tree with a face and lay his hand on its bark and felt the bark feel him back. He woke without moving and said into the dark, "Jon." The name made no sound beyond the room. But far to the north, at the end of the world, Jon Snow shifted once in his sheets, as if a different wind had found its way through the shutters, and then slept as men sleep who have chosen a road and now must walk it. He was not yet a man other men would follow into night without looking back, and he did not yet know how many words could be given weight by a boy with a broken spine who had dreamed a mockingbird and turned a city's board sideways. In the dungeons below the Red Keep, Peter Baelish ran through his ledgers in his head and found a line item he had never had to calculate. For the first time in years, he had not placed all the pieces. Some new hand had touched the board. It was not the eunuchs. It was not the queens. He thought of a northern boy who had climbed and fallen and then had not died and felt the unfamiliar ghost of a god. He had never prayed to laugh at him from inside a tree. He smiled then, even to the dark. Men like him made ladders out of anything. A cell could be one. A failure could be one. He would climb with his tongue if he had to. He would climb with letters if his fingers were taken. He would call debt to his side. He would make himself into someone so useful that the hand who had put him down would, sooner or later, pick him up again with 2 fingers and wonder if perhaps he had been misplaced. Elsewhere, on a different night that had chosen to be warm and full of creatures' noises, a scribe sharpened his quill against the thought that the paper he would fill in the morning would change the places of men and women in the world. He was wrong and he was right. Letters do not move armies, but they make a space for armies to move in. Before the war ever began, a boy who wasn't yet a man and a boy who wasn't yet walking spoke names and asked the right questions in rooms where different men had planned different conversations. The air changed. The shape of it was not yet clear. It would be the gods, the old and the new, and the knives men hid for decades were all patient in their way. Winterfell kept its breath, as it always had. The wall held its weight, as it always did. The city whispered. The black cells drank the end of jokes. Ghost raised his head at the same instant that a bird lifted from the heart tree. A common bird, gray-brown and quick, and the world aligned for the space of a single heartbeat into a possibility that had not existed the day before. Jon would later say, if he said anything, that there had been a moment when everything was quiet and then the quiet broke and nothing was the same again. He did not know yet what would come of it. He didn't need to. He had left words in the world like stones thrown into a river. The ripples had begun, and the banks would learn what shape they were. The garden where the king sometimes came to pretend he liked roses more than spears lay a little apart from the busy stone of the Red Keep. Paths of shell and crushed pottery wound between plump shrubs whose leaves shone as if oiled. The sea sent the faintest breath over the walls to stir the leaves and carry the smell of brine in under the heavier odors of the city. It was late afternoon, the hour when the sun found the angles that turned the keep's red into the color of rubbed copper. Lord Eddard Stark waited in a wedge of shade near a trellis where white flowers lifted their faces with the blind confidence of things that have never known winter. Cersei found him because a queen does not send word that she will come. Rooms make space for her until she arrives. Her gown was green and cut for a woman who knows that the eyes in any room are a weapon. She came with only a single maid at a distance, which meant that somewhere near were men with swords whom Ned could not see. It was the sort of fact he had learned to count without letting it count him. "My Lord Stark," she said, and the shape her mouth made around the words might once have been sweet. "I am told you have a fondness for quiet places. I confess I did not imagine this city possessed one." "It is your city," Ned said. "It is what my husband takes when he wants proof of himself," she returned lightly, and for a moment looked like a girl who had said something that would make her mother laugh. "You sent for me with urgency. Not many men do that anymore." "There's a book on my table," Ned said. "The lineages of the great houses. It says a thing you know and that you would rather I never said aloud. The color of a man's hair has a way of telling on a woman's secrets." Her face did not move. Her eyes did. For all the care in them, they were quick and full of maps. "You have always been graceless," she said, almost with pity. "You put truth on a plate like a slab of meat. Do you want to carve it here among the roses?" "I want you to be gone by morning," Ned said, because Varys had told him to speak early, and the words would not wait. "Take your children and go to your father. Take what gold you can carry. The king is not a subtle man, but he will be told the truth. When he is told it, he will not be kind." Her laugh was a knife that did not pretend to be anything else. "You think I am afraid of kindness? You think that is what I have ever wanted from any man? You want power," he said. "You keep it with lies. The lies have come to their end. They never do." She stepped closer so the sunlight fell along the high line of her cheek. The green silk breathed across the panels of her bodice and breathed back. "Do you know what a secret is, Lord Stark? It is a jewel men think they own. But it eats. It eats and eats until there is nothing left that is not the secret. I have carried mine since I was a girl who learned that my marriage bed would be a battlefield. I do not apologize to northern men for surviving the south." "You will not survive the king's anger," Ned said, and felt no pleasure in saying it. The truth lay between them like a sword neither could pick up yet. "He is not clever enough to be cruel in fine ways. But he is cruel enough to end you with a word. Would he?" She set 2 fingers to the rose's thorn stem and did not flinch. "Robert loves his memory of himself more than he hates me. He puts on the armor of his youth each morning and finds it smaller. I could take his spear and throw it into the sea and he would go after it like a boy. He will not throw me away. He may send me to Casterly Rock. I do not care. I carry my kingdom where you cannot touch it." "Those are not his," Ned said very quietly. "Not one of them. That is the only interesting thing you have ever said to me," she answered, and the words were weary. "Not yours either. Not the king's." "Mine." For the first time, the armor of her voice softened. "I made something that belonged to me out of a life of being made into things. And now you come to name them bastard and monster and anything that will make a man feel tall. They will not sit the throne," he said. "The throne will break them." "It breaks everyone who sits it," she said, and looked past him to the sea. "It is very good at that. You will tell him." "I will," Ned said. "Then speak, and quickly." She lifted her hand and looked at the bead of blood welling on her fingertip where the thorn had found her. "You think I will run. I may choose a way that makes you sorry you waited this long. There are many cups in this city and many boys who like to please their betters. My cousin brings the king what he asks without counting. It would be a pity if Robert choked on his own luck one of these fine mornings when he is pretending he is still young." She touched her tongue to the blood absently, as a cat tests milk. "Go back to your book, my lord. Learn what else hair will tell you. It will not tell you how quickly a man bleeds." She went as she had come, beautifully and with the exact number of glances, and the garden remembered how to be a quiet place. Ned remained until the shade had slid past him. He had wanted to be a man who did not hear the threat in her voice as anything other than noise. He was not that man. He left the garden by the lower stair and found Ser Barristan Selmy in the corridor beyond, white cloak hanging like a fall of snow. "Sire," Ned said, "do you hunt with the king tomorrow?" "I do," the old knight said. "Then I will ride as well. I am no boar spear, but I am good at seeing which man holds the wineskin." Ser Barristan's mouth made the tiniest movement that might, once, have been a smile. "It will be good to see the king have company of a sort that does not make him worse," he said. "He misses that." "Do you?" Ned asked. "Miss the old days?" "I miss a thing that never was," Selmy said simply. "The past is always better than the days a man lives in, if he chooses it. But no one I know rides backward." He bowed and went away to see to harness and an old man's rituals. Honor has habits. That night Ned wrote with his own hand to Stannis Baratheon and sent the letter by a man who had once smuggled from Dragonstone to Duskendale under 3 names and 6 coats. The letter said simply, "Come at once. Bring your proofs if you think mine insufficient. Bring the men you trust. Speak only to me, Renley, and Ser Barristan until you arrive. I would keep a thing from turning into fire." He slept a short sleep with his boots beside the bed and woke to the scrape of metal on stone and the city lifting its own eyelids. The morning smelled like fruit rotting in a basket with flowers on top. He ate bread in the yard among men who looked like men again in the good light and went out with the hunt as the gates opened. The hunt has its own pageant. Horns. Young lords with faces that have never yet learned what it is to be hit where words cannot reach. Pages riding as if the day were theirs to write with heels and spurs. Robert Baratheon in boiled leather that did not do up as it had once done, roaring with delight as if he had not a care in the world, which was a lie he told himself better than any Peter told anyone else. The dogs loved him. Dogs love a man who loves them without shame. They rode past the fields where the city spread its hunger across the earth, out beyond the shanties whose walls were made of anything that would stand upright for a week, into scrub that remembered it had once been woods when Aegon's dragons were still a tale. The sky was heavy but kind. Ned watched the king drink once from a wineskin that Lancel brought and then watched because watching was what he had brought to give. He saw Lancel flinch when the king reached. He saw the boy's jaw set around an idea that had his cousin's face. He rode his horse until it drifted against Lancel's and put out a hand for the skin as if he had just remembered he was thirsty. "Allow me," he said, and drank bread and apple wine that instructed the tongue to nothing. He handed it to Ser Barristan without looking back. The boar they found was an old one with scars like maps across his hide and a regard for men that was unadorned. He burst from a stand of thornbush with a sound like a house collapsing and went for the first moving thing. A hound who had no business being where he was. The hound learned that day what his hide was for. Robert's spear thrust low and true. The boar twisted at the last half-breath and the spear glanced along armor, tore leather, scored skin. Ned moved because he had always moved in moments like that, without thinking and not for glory. He just wanted the world to have the next breath in it, and his horse took him where it needed to be. Men shouted nonsense. The boar hit a tree that had a different opinion of being moved and wheeled. Barristan was there as if he had been born to be there. When it ended with the boar's lungs making a wet sound and the king laughing with the kind of joy that had not belonged to him for 10 years. "Ah!" Robert shouted, and punched Ser Barristan on the shoulder so hard the old knight swayed in the saddle and smiled like a boy. "You were thinking I'd die like a sack of guts in front of pups and prancers? Were you Stark? I was thinking you were quicker than you look," Ned said. Robert glanced down at the scrape along his belly where the tusk had painted a line of bright blood. "A scratch. I've had worse from a girl's nails." He took the wineskin from a page with the greedy reflex of a man who has always meant to take and drank deep. Ned saw Lancel look at Cersei's cousin's own hands afterward as if they had become interesting. He had not brought her wine. Ned felt a breath he had not known he was holding leave him like a ghost. He laughed then, quietly, because little things add up and sometimes they add up the right way. The king returned to the city drunk on victory and wine. He slept like a man who has made the world obey him for a day and will not wake while it forgets him. Ned left men at his chamber door whom he would have trusted with his children in the wild. He went to the Tower of the Hand and set the Book of Lineages where he would have to see it when he turned. He did not go to the queen. He sent for Renley. Renley came, smooth as a table, and sat with one leg crossed over the other and listened like a man humming a tune under his breath. "Littlefinger sits in a cell," Ned said. "He is not to be let out. Varys helped me put him there and will not help me keep him. He is more useful to Varys loose, and so Varys preferred him free. I prefer him where I do not have to wonder which way a knife will turn. I asked you here because you are a Baratheon who can count days. Your brother is slow to anger and quick to forgive. If I show him proof that he has been lied to in his own bed for years, he will not forgive." Renley studied the lay of the words as if the room were a board. "He will not. He will make a great noise, and then he will make a poor decision that will give someone else work to do. We are none of us who we would have been if my brother had kept his health. I have wondered sometimes. Never mind. What do you want of me, Lord Stark?" "Stand with me when I tell him," Ned said. "Stand with Ser Barristan. Stand and say the thing I cannot say and make it sound like a plan and not a winter storm." Renly's laugh was soft and did not carry. "I can do that. I can do it better than anyone in this city. And then what? You will send the queen away? The children? Tywin Lannister is not a man who stays in a chair when you kick his table. If you do not want a war, you must have a dozen men ready to say yes to you at once. And half of them must be cowards who fear losing their places more than they love honor. There is a name for what you describe," Ned said. "It is not the kind of king I like." "It is the kind of king we have," Renly returned. Then he leaned forward until the candlelight touched the ends of his lashes. "I will tell you what I told you once already. Take the children. Take them into custody before you speak. Make it a fact. Once it is a fact, men will decide how brave they are. If you speak first and take second, there will be a space in which someone will act while you are still calling for paper." Ned shook his head. "They are children." Renly's mouth went H. "Art. They are crowns on legs. That is the thing men see. You can pretend it is otherwise because you are good. I like that about you. It will kill you." He stood, rebalanced to perfect charm. "Tomorrow, then, I will be at your shoulder. We will find a way that lets the king call his own counsel, and you can hand him a truth he cannot drop on his foot." He went like a ripple. Silence set down again. The book waited. At the wall, the days had discovered the rhythm that makes the cold tolerable. A morning of blows and bruises and red faces and men discovering where their edges were. An afternoon of dull tasks that numbed the hands and made men grateful for any warmth. A night of stories and snores and wind. In the yard, Jon Snow put boys who had never been asked to consider anyone else in their lives into pairs and asked them to think. The first time he told them to pull their strikes, when a man dropped his guard, they looked at him as if he had told them to refuse meat. The fourth day they were doing it before he called it. He did not praise them. He showed them where they had breathed wrong and made them breathe again. Samwell Tarly arrived like a cloud that had been unstitched and then left to remember its shape. He was fat in the way that said the world had not asked his body to carry much of itself. He was soft and so frightened that fear lay on him like frost. The first time Ser Alliser Thorne threw Sam a sword, Sam fumbled it and bled from his nose because he had sucked his breath in too hard. He said, breathless and earnest, "I don't fight," as if it were a confession that might be accepted. "Then you learn," Jon said when it was his turn to teach him. "One thing at a time." "I can't," Sam whispered. "You can't now," Jon said. He could hear his voice and his father's when he spoke like that. It was a strange comfort. He went around behind Sam and set his hands on Sam's shoulders until they flattened like dough under a baker's palm. "Head up. You breathe here." He pressed a thumb where the breastbone made its little shallow. "Not in your throat, in your belly. When you lift the blade, you don't lift your shoulders with it. You put your weight where your feet are. You are not so bad as you think you are, Sam." Sam cried the first time a boy hit him, and the second time he did not. He only blinked very hard. By the fifth day, he was moving as men move when they are not thinking about how foolish they look, but about where the next thing will go. Jon watched and kept from smiling because he had learned that smiles too soon were a kind of theft. Gren griped and PYP made jokes, and all of it sounded like life that had found a shape in a place that tried to grind the shapes out of men. Tyrion Lannister came with the wind off the east and the taste of other cities in his cloak. He made a point of pissing off the wall with ceremony, as he had promised, because some promises should be kept more for the joke than for the truth in them. He ate roast mutton like a man who would not think of it again in a fortnight, and drank the strong northern beer and let it tell his head a different story than wine did. He sat with Lord Commander Mormont over a map that had seen more elbows than eyes and said, "You are underfed and outnumbered and overconfident. It's charming. You should not be." Mormont grunted. "What would you have me do, imp? Shave my head and sell myself for a second cloak?" "You know," Tyrion said. "Your nephew, perhaps." He put his finger on the little carving that meant the Shadow Tower. "The king needs to be made to feel useful in a way that costs him nothing. If you send him casks and letters with fine language about ancient duty, he will remember he is a Baratheon. He will remember that his hammer did more than knock down princes. He will command that you be sent provisions because he will like calling it his generosity. He will do it because it might be fun for a week. You will take what you can get." "You know the king?" Mormont asked, his thick eyebrows making a single heavy line. "I know how men like him move," Tyrion said, "and I have watched a great many of them from under tables." He glanced at Jon and found the boy watching him in that measuring northern way. "You seem less inclined to be stupid than the average young man. It makes you stand out in a way that is refreshing." "I think Littlefinger is in a cell," Jon said, and the words were news and touchstone both. Tyrion's brows swept up. "Ah, so that's where that bird went. I wondered whether he'd flown to the Queen's sleeve. Good. Fewer songs to learn. Be careful when your family walks in rooms with him later if he lives to walk. Men do not forgive the first time someone shows them their face in a mirror." "He lied about the knife," Jon said. "He lies like breathing," Tyrion said pleasantly. "I of course lie as one tells a story to a child, with affection and for their own good." He lifted a cup to that and drank. "When I go south, I shall tell your king he should feed you for a change. I shall tell him there are worse ways to spend his coin than on men who keep the things in the dark where they belong. He may listen if I make it sound like an adventure." "Thank you," Jon said, meaning it, and Tyrion blinked in actual surprise because men usually meant other things. They stood that night on the wall and looked at the world spilling away, endless and white, and Tyrion said, almost to himself, "I am fond of edges." Ghost came and stood between them and sat, monumental and at ease in the cold that made other creatures tuck into themselves. His eyes took the thin light and held it. "Do you ever think you are meant for one thing and find you are built for another?" Jon asked low. "All the time," Tyrion said. "It's what keeps me alive. If I were the sort of dwarf who wanted to be a knight, I would be a dead dwarf. If I were the sort of man who wanted to be honest in King's Landing, I would be a dead man. It's very freeing once you learn the shape of your own skin." Benjen Stark came out of the blackness like part of it and put a hand on Jon's shoulder. "Right at dawn," he said. "We go up the Milkwater. You do not come. You must learn to do your own duties before you can miss mine." He squeezed once. "Keep the boy from getting his head broken," he added with the faintest nod toward Sam. "I will," Jon said. Benjen went the way he had come, and the cold laid down again like a blanket. Far south, Lady Catelyn Stark went up the mountain to the Eyrie because she could not bear to let other men carry the weight of a thing that had started in her hands. She traveled with an escort that did not draw attention to itself and a face that had learned the lesson of the city quickly. Do not show that you dislike the smell of piss. The mountain's faces were as familiar as a family's. She had been a girl here and a wife and a sister. The sky looked close enough to rub between finger and thumb. Her breath made a little cloth in the air. Lisa received her in a hall that had been made by men who wanted to frighten other men with their fearlessness. The moon door yawned polite and dreadful. The air was cold in a way that felt honest after King's Landing. Lisa had grown into herself as a woman grows into a story she has told too often. There was more of her than there had been, and less of what had made her dear. The boy on her lap was too big to be comforted the way she held him, and too small to be allured. He stared at Catelyn with the fixed, watchful look of a hawk that does not know it is tethered. "Sister," Lysa said, and was already angry that Catelyn had come at all. "You are welcome. You look thin. Does the North not feed its ladies?" "I feed myself," Catelyn said, and let the room feel her. "I came to ask why you wrote a lie to me and sent it north. I came to ask who told you to say that the queen poisoned your husband." Lysa's mouth trembled, then hardened as if she had bitten down on something that wanted to fly out of it. "Peter told me," she said, with defiance that belonged to a different argument. "He said the queen would kill me next. He said he loved me. He said he remembered the color of my hair. He sent me words for the herbs when John's cough grew worse. He said it was for his pain. He said." "You knew?" Catelyn said, and the words came out flat and stunned, like a hand slapping water. "Lysa, you knew what the tears of Lys do." Lysa's eyes slid away and then back in quick little darts. "I knew he loved me," she said quickly. "I knew I would not go back to his hands. I knew he loved me. You always had everything, Cat. He wanted me. He does. He will. He promised." Catelyn stepped forward before she had told herself to move and caught Lysa's wrist in both hands. It was soft, underloved flesh. "He promised you the world to watch it burn," she said, and her voice shook now. "He promised you a house by the sea in a song. He sent you a poison and told you it was sweetness. He has sat in a cell 2 weeks now while we put his lies into a basket and count them. If you will not speak to me, speak to your own honor. Speak to the man you married and put in the ground." Lysa's face pulled itself into weeping and the tears did not come. The boy stirred on her lap and made a high, thin sound. "Leave," Lysa said. "Go away. Take your wolves and go down the mountain. You do not tell me what to do. You never did. You hid in the north with your honor and left me to learn how to live here. You want me to give you my son and my guard and my pride and my hurt. You want to put them in a box for your lord husband to do sums with. No, no." She shook her head so hard the pins bit and tugged her hair in painful little increments. "You will take nothing from me. If you bring down my door with your king, I will throw my child through that one first and walk after him to keep him company." Catelyn released her. She stood with her hands open, as if to show even the cold air that they were empty. "I do not want your child," she said. "I want him to grow to a man who does not think fear is the same thing as strength. I will go, but I will not keep silent. I will carry your words back to the court and I will not soften them, Lysa." "Do not come again," Lysa said low. "I would not choose to," Catelyn said and turned, and in the doorway found a man she did want to see, for he had always been to her the shape of hope and pragmatism. Brynden Tully, called Blackfish, had more gray in his hair and more life in his eyes than anyone in that hall. He held her as a father might, quick and firm, and did not waste breath on anything but sense. "Go," he told her softly. "You can do nothing here that won't make it worse. I'll watch her, and if she leans wrong, I'll push the other way." "Do you know," Catelyn asked, "about the letters?" "I know more than I did last month," he said. "The veil will not get up for a song, but it may get up to keep from being knocked down. Be careful of how fast you ride when you leave. The mountain has its own ideas." She kissed his cheek and tasted salt, and was not sure if it was hers or his. She went down the steps with her guard, and the air bit her throat, and she did not mind. It was honest to be hurt by the world. In King's Landing, Tyrion Lannister arrived from the north with his hair full of salt and the dust of miles in his boots. The city greeted him with the theatrical surprise it shows to any man it has seen 100 times. It clapped for him with both hands and picked his pocket with a third. He found his sister in her solar, and she kissed his cheek with a mouth that remembered its own power, then turned away with the certain lazy grace of an animal who knows the extent of its leash. "Little brother," she said, "you smell like snow." "I smell like men who would rather not starve," he said cheerfully. "The wall is, how shall I put this, less ornamental than this charming hell. But it is honest in the way your city is not. Honesty is cheap, she said. People who cannot afford anything else spend it and think themselves rich. Her eyes sharpened. Did you bring me news? Your letters were dull. I try to keep them so, for I assume they are read by half a dozen curious people with worse hair than mine, he said. But yes, I bring you a thing. The Lord of the North suspects you of many crimes. The one he can show to a drunk king and be believed is the simplest. You made a cuckold of Robert with our brother. He has a book that speaks in little brown words. He has a sword that will speak when he is done reading. I thought you would enjoy the irony that your green boy Lancel did not manage to drown a boar with wine. Cersei went very still. The air in the solar changed as if a storm had leaned its shoulder against the windows. He told you this? No, Tyrion said. He told the king's ears, which have begun to listen to the right mouths. I tell you because, am I not a kind brother? I have grown fond of you in a way that makes me prefer you alive. What does he intend? She asked, and now there was something he had never seen in her voice in years. Not fear exactly, not doubt. Something like the mathematics of an unfamiliar game. He intends to tell Robert, Tyrion said. He intends to have Ser Barristan in the room when he does it and to stand where Renley Baratheon can smile in the right direction. He intends to make a wall of witnesses and put you before it. She crossed to the window and looked out across the city with its roofs like a patchwork of old clothes. Then I will move faster, she said, half to herself. I should have cut his throat the day he came into my house with winter on his cloak. She looked back at Tyrion with something that might have been curiosity in a gentler woman. Will you help me? In what? He asked. In cutting throats? I haven't the reach for it. If you ask me whether I will help you talk while other men decide things, yes. I am very well suited to that. What do you mean to do? She lifted a hand and closed it on air. Take my children and go before he can make a spectacle of us. Put Joff on a ship. Put Tommen and Myrcella on another to Dorne and call it a betrothal. Break the board while the men are arguing about the rules. She smiled then, quick and almost girlish. Will he chase me across the narrow sea? He has not chased anything but pork in 10 years. He will not, Tyrion said. But your father will open his doors, and there the game begins again with different pieces. Stannis will come. Do you like Stannis, sweet sister? I like the plague better, she said calmly. He will put his hand on my throat in the name of law. Do you know what law is in the mouths of men like him? A blade. He has waited years to feel good about putting it to work. I shall bring wine, Tyrion said. It will be tedious. He studied her as a man studies a cat on a shelf full of fragile, expensive things. Do not poison the king, Cersei. I did not say I would, she said, and turned away so he could not see whether she meant to or not. When the king woke, he woke like a man who has slept in armor. His first words were a jest. His second were to call for meat. His third were to roar for a hunt again in 2 days to show the boar that he had not yet learned his lesson. Ned came to him when the fat had been cut and the grease wiped away and found a man with a face that could do cruelty without thinking and kindness by accident. And that was the hardest sort to move with words. I have a matter, Ned said, and did not soften it. Gods, Robert said, make it brief. If it is not ale or killing, my patience is not what it was. It is a killing, Ned said. The killing of your honor if you do not hear me. I would not let that happen to a man I once called brother. Robert's eyes, blue as a bright morning on the Trident, went hard. Speak, he said. Ned set the book on the table and opened it and showed him the brown lists, and then, because words on paper need faces to teach them meaning, he called in Tobo Mott to speak about the boy with black hair whom he had apprenticed, and he called a stable hand from the Street of Flower who had never stood before a king in his life and told him he had seen the prince and that the prince's hair had never shone in the sun like a Baratheon's, and he called Ser Barristan Selmy to describe the dead. Prince Rhaegar and all his children as the color of crows, and he called Renly to point with a beautiful hand and say softly, "The seed is strong." When the room had filled with enough truth to choke on, Ned said very simply, "Joffrey is not your son. Myrcella is not your daughter. Tommen is not your son. They are your wife's by her brother." The king did not move for a long time. He did not even breathe in the way that could be seen. Men watched him the way men watch a man who has been skewered to see whether the blood will start. At last he laughed, and it was a terrible thing to hear, and then the laugh broke into something that was not laughter at all. He put his hands to his face and made a sound like someone being cut carefully. "By the gods," he said. "By all the gods." He sat and looked at his hands as if they were a man he was considering killing. "When?" he asked, to no one and to the room. "How long?" "Years," Ned said. "Since the beginning." "That bed," Robert said, and his voice was hoarse. And then he said a word that men do not say in front of queens and their children. "That lying." He stood in a movement that scattered the dogs under the table. "Where is she?" "Do not go to her," Ned said. "Not now. There are ways to do this that break the fewest bones. We will send her away. We will send the children to places where they will be well. We will call a council, one you can trust. We will send for Stannis." "Stannis?" Robert said, and the name was like ale after thirst. It hurt and it healed. "Gods. He told me once at Storm's End that I would end by laughing while someone stole my shoes. I thought he was making one of his jokes." He put both hands on the table and leaned as if he'd been made suddenly old. "I cannot look at the boy," he said, and for a moment there was a father in him anyone would have known. "He is cruel, and he is not mine, and yet he is a child who laughs when I make a fool of myself with a spear. I may have loved him for the wrong reasons. I am a poor thing, Ned." "You are a king," Ned said. "Be that." Robert's eyes met his. I will send her to the rock. I will send the girl to Dorne. Gods, the Martells will like that. It will make them feel as if they have won something. And the little one to where? The Arbor. Pax to Redwine likes the sea more than he likes intrigue. He will feed him wine and teach him to sail, and perhaps the boy will learn to be content with a ship. And Joff, he swallowed. Joffrey must be made safe from himself. I will not have him killed, Ned. I am not that man, but he will not be king. He will not, Ned agreed, though he had not known until that moment that Robert could say it. We will write to Dragonstone. We will have Stannis here within a fortnight if the wind is kind. He will be your heir until your son comes of age. He paused and did not add that he did not think Robert would have another son, and then surprised himself by saying, "You might try. You could do it. The realm could then be what it pretends to be." Robert snorted, as if he had coughed laughter and smoke at once. "Find me a woman who does not look at me like a pig on two legs," he said. "Perhaps your sister-in-law knows one. You have always had luck with women who weren't made for Southron beds. Gods, bring me Ser Barristan. Bring me ink. Bring me a skin of wine. No, not that one. A fresh one." He looked at the wineskin at his elbow as if seeing it for the first time and then pushed it aside as if it were a toad. Cersei did not flee that day because some part of her still believed in the strength of a stare. She walked into the king's chamber when summoned with a face that would have won wars 100 years ago. She found the council waiting, and Ser Barristan and Renley, and Lord Eddard with a parchment in his hand that looked too small to carry such weight. She found her husband with a look on his face she had once loved and had not seen in 10 years. The look of a man who meant to do a thing no one could stop. "You will go to Casterly Rock," Robert said without preface. "You will take the boy with you. You will not take the girl. She will go to Dorne. The little one will go to the Arbor, because it amuses me to think of a Lannister learning to swim. You will go with honor and with an escort. You will not come back until I say you may. Do not send for your father. He will come whether you send or not." Cersei had not planned for this shape of the knife. She had planned for an absence she controlled. The publicness of it moved her somewhere she did not like being moved. "You will not humiliate me," she said. "You will not humiliate my children. I am your queen." "You were," Robert said, and his voice was tired and pure. "When you get to your father, tell him the next time he sends a girl to a king's bed with rumors braided into her hair, I'll send her back without her head." Tell him if he brings a sword to my city, I will break it over his skull." "Your city," she said, and smiled the way she did when she meant to make a man feel small. "Mine until someone better takes it," Robert said. "It will not be you." He nodded once, and two of the Kingsguard stepped forward in that ritual manner they have when they must pretend that sheathing a sword is as glorious as drawing it. "Go and gather your things. You will sail on the morning tide." There were 100 other ways it might have gone. The air had a taste as if someone had cut citrus and the spray had reached everyone's lips. Cersei looked at Ned and saw that he would not soften. She looked at Renley and saw amusement, at Selmy and saw pain, at her husband and saw the end of a road she had been walking since she was a girl and thought she had found a lane around a wall. Something inside her drew its fingernails down the inside of her skin. She bowed very slightly. "As my king commands," she said, and the room learned what it was to watch a woman's rage bank itself like a fire given a poker. Tyrion watched from his own shadow and did not cheer because he did not yet know which way this would turn. He liked the shape of it. He distrusted any shape that looked like sense. He went to find Varys to hear whether the eunuch thought the air was about to change pressure. "It is a new tune," Varys murmured. "We shall see if the players know the steps." Ships were made ready. The queen's coffers spat up small, angry avalanches of coin in the counting house, and the men whose job it was to move money sweated and swore in quiet voices. Joffrey raged and sulked and broke things and ordered armor that would make him look like a god of some bronze people. Myrcella cried when she realized she would not be going with her mother. Tommen asked whether there were cats on the arbor and if he could have one. Sansa Stark, who had dreamed so very carefully for so very long, stood with her hands clasped and felt a realization draw itself across her like shade. It is possible to be wrong about someone and to have the world stay in one piece while your belief breaks. She watched Joffrey strike a serving boy for not tying his new cloak fast enough and saw how handsome cruelty looks in a boy's face and found it ugly for the first time. Arya tried to stab the hem of Sansa's gown with a pin to make her move, and Sansa slapped her hand away without looking. And neither of them knew this was the kind of love sisters do when the ground is shifting. Ned slept badly that night because it is hard to put a man's wife aside with the firmness that does not let him hate you later for letting him be himself. He dreamed of snow falling on a red tree and woke with his heart working at a different speed. He went to the window and looked out at the lamps burning along the walls and the sea that had decided to be black. He thought of his sons and of a boy who was and was not his, who had sat by a bed and moved words like stones. He wrote to Winterfell and told Robb to keep the gates shut and the spears oiled and to hold, no matter whose banners went up and down around him. He wrote to Jon through a raven that would find its way to Maester Aemon and said nothing that would be kept out of the hands of men who read other men's letters. He wrote the thing he could: "Ghost sleeps by your brother. He wakes when the moon does. Stay warm." At dawn, the queen's ships were ready. The quays at the mud gate were slick with grease and expectation. The lion banner hung over the gangplank heavy as meat. Cersei wore black because it looked like power on her. She kissed Myrcella fiercely enough to leave her mouth reddened and then turned her face aside to show that it had not mattered to her. She put a hand on Joffrey's shoulder and squeezed until her fingers left marks. She angled her mouth to his ear and said a thing that made his eyes narrow with pleasure like a cat's. She said nothing at all to the little boy who would be given cats and sweet wine on an island where men were fat and harmless. She walked up the plank as if she were going to a coronation. Robert did not come to watch her go. He drank with Renley and laughed at something that had not been very funny. He would not let himself be watched. He sent Ser Barristan to stand in his place because honor must be present if the king chose to be absent. Ned went because someone had to count the number of oars and the men at the oars and the swords at their belts. He stood with his hands behind him and felt the sea's damp lick his knuckles. Tyrion came because he had learned that the places where people pretend nothing happens are the places where everything does. Varys came because he was never where he was not useful. Janos Slynt came because he could smell where power sat and liked to put his chair near it. The city came to stare because nothing in a city is private if it touches the river. The lines were loosed. The ships took the tide. The queen did not turn back or lift a hand to hail. Joffrey shouted something obscene at the men on the wharf because he thought a king's tongue was something that could be thrown like meat to dogs. A ripple went through the crowd. Ned found his hand on the dagger in his belt without memory of putting it there. He thought, not for the first time, that he did not know what shape Joffrey would take as a man, but he was grateful not to learn with the realm. That night, the Red Keep was quieter. It had not been made to hold less weight. It noticed the lack the way a man notices when a pain does not come where he expects it. He pokes at the space and wonders if that itself is a new pain. The halls breathed freer and then grew suspicious of it. In his rooms, Robert drank less than he could have and signed more paper than the men around him would believe. He wrote Stannis' name in 3 places and looked at it as if it were a weapon. He rubbed his face and said to Ned as if he had been talking for hours, "You know he will make everyone miserable. It will be like being kept by a ledger." "Perhaps the sums will be right," Ned said. "Perhaps." Robert leaned back and stared at the canopy scrolled with men who had never existed. "Do you remember the last time we were happy? Don't lie to me," Ned thought. "When you first came north," he said. "When you laughed and it shook the rafters, and we ate in the winter town like boys who had stolen from their own kitchens. There was snow in your beard and there was Lyanna in my head," Robert said, and the name did not bleed when he said it. "It's an old story, Ned. It's gone. I may one day learn to be an old man who does not shout for his supper. I may—" He stopped and lifted his head like a dog who hears a sound men don't. "Do you hear that?" Outside, the city made one of its many nightly voices. Bells in some far quarter, a woman's laugh, a child woken and made to sleep again. Under it, under the clatter and the warm, human mess, there was a sound like cloth tearing quietly. Varys came as men like him come, already present, simply noticed. "Your Grace," he murmured. "Lord Stark, I thought you would wish to know that Lord Tywin's men have moved at the Golden Tooth. No battle, a closing of roads, a message sent in the form of an inconvenience. Also, a raven from Dragonstone. Lord Stannis is at sea." Robert closed his eyes for a heartbeat and opened them with himself inside them again. "He comes like a storm," he said. "Good. Let him blow the dust from the stones." He glanced at Ned and made a face that looked like both apology and relief. "We move early tomorrow. Call the council. I will sit. I will put on the face that makes them do as they are told." "Your Grace," Varys murmured. "There is another small matter." "There always is," Robert sighed. "The dwarf," Varys said, and inclined his head toward Tyrion's absence as if mentioning a man's shadow. "He has written to his father. It is possible that the ravens from one coast and those from the other will meet and kiss in the dark." "Let them wed," Robert growled. "If Tywin wants a fight, he can bring his sword and stop playing at cards with boys." Varys' smile was as light as breath. "As you command." The days that followed had the feeling of a board being cleared to make room for a game played with different pieces. Men who had whispered in corridors found themselves clearing their throats in front of the king. The City Watch, which had thought of itself as a militia of bribes, discovered that money was not the only way a man could feel rich. Honors were distributed with a meanness that made them glitter. Janos Slynt, who had expected to be offered gold quietly, was offered a better post, Lord Commander of the City Watch, in a room with witnesses, and took it with a greasy bow because he had the sense to know he had not been the one to write that script. He went away and swore to prove himself loyal to whomever owned the next sunrise. Renley brought his charm to bear on a dozen lords who had never had reason to love Stannis and made them find reasons to love the king's choice. Ser Barristan stood like a column of sanity in rooms full of breath and lies. Pycelle coughed and remembered the names of a few herbs that were not poisons. Varys was useful in the way a river is useful if you know where it goes. Ned dreamt of Winterfell in snatches. He saw Bran's eyes open and the shape of Ghost at the foot of the bed. He saw Robb at the table learning that there is more than one way to be a lord. He saw Catelyn at the Eyrie with her hands outstretched and empty, and his heart hurt him quietly with the long, slow pain that comes from being away. Bran learned that sometimes the world comes to your bed even when your legs do not take you to the world. He lay with his hands folded and let his mind slide along the roots of trees and the ridges of the keep stones. He watched a raven at the rookery gain a new dignity when it was chosen for a hard flight and wished it luck with a boy's seriousness. He watched Rob smile in the yard at something Theon had said and then not smile because a man had come to speak of grain. He dreamed of a woman across the sea with hair that moved like a river and a circle of men with faces red with heat chanting in a language that felt familiar at its ends. He woke and did not tell Maester Luwin about the words the fire had said because some words burn. Samwell Tarly discovered that he could breathe and move and not die. He discovered that Jon Snow liked to stand in doorways and say things that made other men behave as if they had decided to think. He discovered the library at Castle Black and put his hands on its spines as if he were laying them on the backs of horses he had not the courage to ride. He found a book that mentioned a thing older than iron and newer than fear and took it to Maester Aemon, who read it with blind eyes and a mind that saw further than men born 100 years after him. "Tell your Lord Commander," Aemon said, fragile and unstoppable. "Tell him to write again. Tell him to say the wall needs men who are not thieves and not cowards. Perhaps if the king finds himself needing to look like a king, he will remember that winter does not care about men's feuds." "I will," Sam whispered, and the idea that he would tell anyone anything and be listened to made him sit quietly for a long time until his heart stopped behaving like a drum. On a morning that the city had chosen to be gold to hide its smells, Stannis Baratheon came into King's Landing with 10 ships and a face that made the sun seem frivolous. He walked up Aegon's high hill as a man walks to an execution he does not intend to be his. He did not bow when he reached the king. He nodded. It was a gesture that said, "I have done my duty. Now you do yours." Robert, who had sobered himself with the unfamiliar labor of making decisions too quickly for his taste, embraced his brother with the kind of feeling that makes other men uncomfortable. "Stannis," he said, and for a moment the boys they had been stood in the room. Then it was gone, and the king put a parchment into Stannis' hand. "You will be my hand," he said, "until I find it in me to be my own." Stannis read the words as if they were a meal he had not ordered and found tolerable. He did not look at Cersei's name on the order to depart. He did not need to. He looked at Renley with the special affection one brother reserves for another when he has known him too long. He looked at Ned Stark and saw the kind of honesty that makes a useful edge if it can be set in a handle. "Very well," he said, and men who had served under him at Storm's End breathed out without knowing they had been holding their breath. That night the city's wind changed. It does that when men make decisions that move more than furniture. The gutters sang in a different key. The brothels took different jewels. The pale singers in the Street of Silk invented new verses to old songs about queens sent home and kings who remember their names. Somewhere in the maze, a man was stabbed for a debt and someone else shrieked that it was politics. The Red Keep held itself carefully as if afraid to wake a sleeping child. In the black cells, Peter Baelish listened to the footsteps of the guards and lay a different grid over them. This one belongs to a man who wishes he were elsewhere. This one to a man who has the imagination to fear what happens when a thing he has cut comes back to him. He had not been idle. Men like him are not idle even when their hands are still. He had placed his promises like coins on a board years ago. Some would return. He had made himself so useful to so many men that one of them would decide to be useful to him rather than risk needing his usefulness later and not finding it. He did not waste time hating Ned Stark, for hatred is a poor investment when a man plans to live many years. He saved hate for those who might stop him living them. From the wall, a raven came with stiff wings and a spiteful peck for the hand that caged it and a message that said, very simply, that winter had not forgotten its script. Jeor Mormont's thick writing made it almost a picture. Stannis read it and said, "We will send men," and made a list that began with criminals and ended with names that would smart when they saw them. Robert signed it with the satisfaction of a man who had given something that could be called noble at nearly no cost to himself and enjoyed the taste of the word. Do you ever consider that one right thing done early can save men a season of grief? Renly asked Tyrion that evening as they leaned against a parapet and watched the torches build themselves into a comet on the street below. "I consider it every day," Tyrion said, And I consider how rarely men can tell which thing is the right one when it walks past them dressed as a whore." Renley laughed. "You are sour. I am sweet compared to my father," Tyrion said cheerfully, and took a grape from a tray and tossed it into his mouth, and thought of Catelyn Stark's eyes as she had regarded him in the yard at Winterfell, and of Jon Snow's voice when he asked him not to be alone in a room with Peter Baelish, and of the wall's thin wind. He was not a sentimental man. He knew that about himself and did not apologize for it. And yet he wondered for a breath whether the world had just turned a corner without knocking over its lamp. On the King's Road north of the Neck, Robb Stark rode out with Grey Wind loping like thought at his stirrup to see a village that had not managed to bring in its harvest before the first sharp nights. He put men with carts under Theon and told them not to swagger at small folk. He learned that when he ordered a thing and saw it done, it left a taste on his tongue that was not power so much as relief. This is what it feels like when someone does what you ask and the world is better after. He went back to Winterfell and sat at his father's seat and thought of writing to him and did not, because the raven would take too long and the letter would have to say things a son cannot say to his father without time and meat and eyes and the gods. Instead he went to the godswood and sat under the red leaves and told the old face about the day until Grey Wind sighed and put his chin on Robb's knee as if to say, "You have said enough, boy." Bran dreamed and did not know he was dreaming. He was a bird with a beak like a knife, and he pecked at a chain that bound a man's tongue, and the chain gave a little. He was a fish in black water, and he saw a pale shape walking on the bottom, slow and without bubbles, and his heart hammered, and he knew a thing without knowing how he knew. The old stories were bones under the ground, and some of them had begun to stand. He woke with sweat cold on his chest and smiled anyway because he had managed to turn in his bed without help, and it felt like a victory as great as sending a man to a cell. He said, into the dark where only Ghost's breath answered, "We are not done yet." In King's Landing, Ned Stark stood on the terrace outside the Tower of the Hand where he could look down and see the city's glimmer and the long black reach of the river. He tested the shape of what came next inside him and found it strange but tolerable. He would stay long enough to see Stannis hold the realm steady. Then he would go home. He would walk into Winterfell and he would put his hand on the stone of the yard and know it again, and he would kneel at the heart tree and tell it that he had tried to keep a war from starting, and that he had succeeded for a season. Varys came to stand beside him as if he were the knight's twin. "My lord," he murmured, "you have done a thing that most men fail at. You have seen the inside of a city and not mistaken it for the world." "I have seen enough," Ned said. "There is always more," Varys replied. "A dragon across the sea wakes slower than men think, but it wakes. The dead remember their own names in the far north. But for now, we have placed one little finger where it cannot flick and make us dance. Sometimes that is enough." "Sometimes," Ned agreed. The wind lifted then and brought a smell clean enough to make him close his eyes. Salt. Yes, but with a sharpness under it that did not belong to this latched-together place. It smelled like home in the way a word can sometimes sound like home. Not accurate, but beloved. He thought of a boy on a wall far to the north, and another in a bed under a weirwood, and of a wife whose hands had been made harder by the mountains and who would be coming down them now, and of a king who had not died in a lie. He did not pretend it was happiness. He did not, finally, need to. He let the wind go through him and leave him the way northern winds leave men. Standing, a little colder, and a little more himself.